whatever it still is. Some of you I actually recognize, but many of you I don't. My name is David Fink. I've been a Talmud of Breitowitz for many years. He was actually my professor in law school 36 years ago. Thank God, with the advent of modern technology, my family continues to learn from him every week through Torah Anytime and through other mediums that are available to us. And I just want all of you to take a second to appreciate being with him every week. He's one of the most incredible people on the planet. And it's a big covet for me that he allows me to speak to you guys. I know usually you speak about Parsha. We only have, I think, 7 or 8 sources altogether. We're really only using the first 6. If there's extra time, I'll use those sources on the last page. But this is more of a global idea that I want to share with you, because you're all sitting here learning, and you're learning Gemara, and you're learning various things, all really important for your development. But what you need to know, and this is something that no one really comes right out and tells you, is that whether it's philosophy, whether it's personal conduct, or whether it's psychology, there are tremendous lessons that jump out of the pages of the Torah and the Chumash if you're prepared to look for them. If you're not just reading them as words, and you're actually looking at the context and the meaning of what's going on, it can sometimes be breathtaking. So the first source I have here is from Parshas Noach. Everybody's familiar with the story of the great flood, and the water was tossing and turning the ark for all those months. And the Torah tells us in source number 1, if you look at line number 2, the water finally started to recede at Chodesh HaIsiri until the 10th month. Ba'asiri be'echad l'chodesh, on the 11th day of the 10th month, Niru Roshei Har, the tops of the mountains became visible. Many of you are probably familiar with the greatest philosophical question of all time. The greatest philosophical of all time, you're going to all finish it when I start the sentence for you. If a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it still make a sound? Philosophers have been debating this for 1,000 years or more, which first of all shows that philosophers have way too much time on their hands. And second of all, it's really a silly question, because the fact is it depends on how you define sound. If you define sound as something making sound waves, then obviously it made a sound. Can you give me a source sheet, please? Obviously, if you define sound as something that makes sound waves, then it makes a sound. If, however, you define sound as something hearing the sound waves and translating it into something audible, then there has to be someone there to hear it or some device there to pick it up. But in any event, look at what this pasuk says. On the 11th day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. And the very next pasuk, the second to last line on source number 1, Vayhi miketz harboim yom, and 40 days later, after the ark came to rest on Mount Ararat, Vayiftach Noach chalon hateva, he opened the window for the first time. Well, if Noach's opening the window for the first time 40 days later, who were the mountains visible to 40 days before? Must be that mountains are visible even if there's no one looking at them. Which, to me, suggests that if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, it still makes a sound. It's a kind of shticky thing, but I want to give you an idea of some of the things you can learn from Sukkim if you're looking a little bit deeper. Go into source number 2. I don't know how familiar all of you are with this particular story in the Torah, but there's several lines underlined here. This is the story of the person who was born. The Mefarshim say this was the only child born in Mitzrayim, born in Egypt during servitude, who was born to an Egyptian father. That none of the Jewish women had illegitimate children when they were in Mitzrayim for 210 years. This was the only one. And they referred to him just by this title, the Ben Ish Mitzri, the son of an Egyptian man. He's the only one. So they were able to refer to him with this category, the son of an Egyptian man. His mother was from Shevet Dan. Apparently the story goes in Mefarshim about how the Egyptian master fooled her and he called her husband out early to work that day so he would be free to go into the house in the dark and be with her. But in any event, they had a child, and he's referred to as the Ben Ish Mitzri. Well, the Ben Ish Mitzri is going about his business with Klal Yisrael in the desert, and he's living with his mother's family in Shevet Dan. And something happened. And this is in Parshas Emor, towards the end of Sefer Vayikra. This is when they start discussing how they're going to divvy up land in Eretz Yisrael. How are you going to know where your Shevet is? How do you know which parcel of land is yours? And so it came out that the land is being given out by fathers' families. We all know that if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. We get that. But when they gave out nachlos, when they gave out inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, it was done by fathers' families. So this guy comes out and starts complaining. Source number 2, Ben Isha Yisraelis, v'hu Ben Ish Mitzri, b'toch b'nei Yisrael, v'yimatznu ben Achana ben ha-Yisraelis v'Isha Yisrael. He's a Jewish guy. V'yikov ben Isha, he starts complaining. Es Hashem v'yikalo v'yavoas Moshe. He curses Hashem. He says, this is unfair. I'm a Jew, just like everybody else here. My mother's Jewish. And I'm not getting a chelik in Eretz Yisrael because they're being given out by fathers' families. I didn't do anything wrong. And even if my father was not a good person, I am a full-fledged Jew by virtue of my mother being Jewish. And I'm being taken out of the inheritance of having a land in Eretz Yisrael because it's being given out by fathers' families. Everybody understand his complaint? Yeah. So anyway, what ends up happening in the last 3 lines in source number 2, everyone who heard him curse Hashem, they give him skila, they stone him for cursing Hashem. Okay, it's a story we could ask a lot of questions about, and a lot of commentaries discuss it, but at its core, let's get the principle. The guy comes out and says, I'm Jewish, my mother's Jewish, I'm a full-fledged Jew, and I've been living with you for all this time. And now that inheritance is being given out in Eretz Yisrael, you're telling me I'm excluded. Because even though I'm a full-fledged Jew, it's being given out according to fathers' families. And he curses Hashem, and they ask, and it's not in the source sheets, they ask, what do we do with this guy? We never had even cursed God before. And he says, you take him out and you give him skila. Okay, that's the story. That's the core points in the story. Now I want you to look down in source number 3. Source number 3 comes down in Parsha Shashavua terms about 7 to 8 weeks later. And this is a story of the Benos Slavchad. How many of you have heard of the Benos Slavchad? Benos Slavchad are 3 daughters, 3 sisters, and the only thing we really know about them is that their father died during the time in the desert, in the Midbar. There are some Mefarshim who say that he was the Makoshesh Eitz, the person who chopped wood on Shabbats, to see if it was really true that what Hashem was saying, you weren't allowed to do certain things on Shabbos. The Gemara has certain discussions about him. It was L'Shem Shemayim, it wasn't, whatever it was. But the point is, that's who the Benos Slavchad were. They were people who complained also that they were getting gypped. Because here we have no brothers. We're full-fledged Jews. Our father and mother were Jewish. Our father died in the Midbar before inheritance was given out. And we're not going to have a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. Similar taina, right? Listen to this. Source number 3, halfway down the paragraph. Lomi Yigro Shom Avinu. Why should our father's name be erased? Mitoch mishpachto, from our family's heritage. Ki ein lo bein, because he had no sons. To no lono achuza betoch ach evenu. We should get the inheritance that our brothers would have had. Vayikrav Moshe es mishpat lefnei Hashem. And Moshe brought this to Hashem. Seems like they have a legitimate taina. Vayomer Hashem al Moshe kain benos slavchad. Dovros nosan titein lehem achuzas nachla. They're right. Listen to the benos slavchad. They should get an inheritance. B'toch achi avihim, in place of the brothers that would have been born to their father. How do you reconcile these two stories? The Ben Ish Mitzri complains, I'm a full-fledged Jew, and I'm not getting a chelik because my father wasn't Jewish. Comes along the Benos Slavchad, literally within a month's time, and says to Moshe Rabbeinu, we're getting gypped. Our parents are Jewish, but we have no chelik in Eretz Yisrael because we have no brothers, and our father's dead. There's no one to give his chelik to. And they end up giving the chelik to the Benos Slavchad. The Ben Ish Mitzri gets skila. He gets stoned. And the Benos Slavchad get a chelik in Eretz Yisrael. How do you reconcile this? Any ideas? Yeah.
The person that got stoned was being selfish. He was and he cursed God on top of that for not giving him what he felt was deserving to him. While the people that are the sons and daughters, while the man who was going to receive land had no sons of his own, there's still like a land there that's some form of inheritance meant to go to his family. And even though he doesn't have sons, it should still go to his male heirs or his male family.
I think that's exactly a big part of what we're going to talk about. Anybody else have any explanations for this? Yeah.
If it didn't go to the daughters, or in the second case, if it didn't go to the daughters, where would it have gone?
It would have been redistributed among the other members of Shevet Dan. You know, it would have been given to somebody based on their father's family. It just wouldn't have been that family. But I think what this gentleman said here is 1,000% right. Look at the difference in the way they approached the problem. The Ben Ish Mitzri comes out swinging. Moshe Rabbeinu is corrupt. Hashem is not just. This whole thing is crazy. And he ends up getting stoned. Look what the Beno Slavchad say. It says on the first line of source number 3, Vatikravna. And they approached. And they came to Moshe Rabbeinu in a docile way. And they said, it seems like there's perhaps an injustice happening here. And they explained their situation. At the core, their complaints are exactly the same. But the unmistakable difference is the way they approach their problem. One person comes out swinging, attacking, accusing, until eventually he curses God and earns himself the sentence of stoning. The Beno Slavchad say there appears to be an injustice. They approach Moshe Rabbeinu, he approaches Hashem for an Eitzah. They end up getting a Chelik in Eretz Yisrael. In plain English terms, I would put it like this. Sometimes how we say something is even more important than what we are saying. When you come out and you're yelling and kicking and screaming, first of all, everyone thinks you're Meshuggah. And second of all, nobody's disposed or inspired to help you. And third of all, and probably most important, the Rambam says very clearly that when someone's angry, they say things they don't mean, they act in a way that's out of character, and bad things happen. That's the Rambam. That's why the Rambam says you should have every midas beinus. You shouldn't be too generous, you shouldn't be too cheap. You shouldn't be too arrogant, you shouldn't be too humble. Everything in between. There's a time and place for everything, with the exception of one midah. The Rambam says you should never have the midah of kas, of being angry. Because when people are angry, they do things out of character, they hurt people's feelings, and they're just not acting like themselves. That could not be captured more graphically than in the contrast between the Beno Slavchad, the daughters of Slavchad, and the Ben Ish Mitzri, the son of an Egyptian man who comes out swinging. Sometimes how we say something is as important or more important than what we are saying. And number two, when you're angry, just keep your mouth shut. It's a good lesson. There's plenty of times to discuss things and talk about things, but when you're angry is the worst time to talk about things because you're not yourself. You're not necessarily in control. Again, this is something that 97% of people who are born into religious families and grow up from, and they go to yeshiva and they go to day school, they miss this lesson. And you know why they miss it? They miss it because it's 7 weeks apart. And by the time they get to the story of the Beno Slavchad, they forgot about the story of the Ben Ish Mitzri, or they didn't put two and two together. There are incredibly profound lessons here if you just take the time and realize how to put it together. The same concept applies in learning Gemara. You learn a Masechta like Makas. Makas has all the dynims of when you give lashes or malchus to somebody, has the dinis of Edim and Edim Zomim and many other things. Makas is an incredible Masechta. If you get schus later on to learn Maseches Sanhedrin, Maseches Sanhedrin, I would say, probably has about a 20 to 30% overlap with Maseches Makas. There's many similar things that are discussed from a different angle, different perspective, different Amoraim. When you learn Makas for the second time after you've learned Sanhedrin, it's a different Masechta. There's so many other things that come in context. The totality of Chumash, the totality of Torah for that matter, including Gemara and everything else, is such that every time you learn something new, it enhances and enriches everything you've learned before. It's just a more complete picture of what you're getting. And that's the one thing that I want you to take out of this story of the Ben Ish Mitzri and the Beno Slavchad, the different approaches. Now, that was 95 to 97% of people who have been religious all their lives miss. You get into source number, flip the page to source number 4, and we're talking about something that everybody misses, including some people that have rabbi in front of their name. because it's not something you would understand just from reading the words. You have to delve into them and understand, not making anything up, not getting any abstract thoughts in, just reading what the words say. So source number 4 talks about the story with Korach. Everybody knows the story with Korach. Korach was a member of Shevet Levi, the same tribe that Moshe and Aaron and Miriam were from. And he's complaining. He says, I don't understand. Moshe, you've been in charge since we left Mitzrayim. You put your brother as the head Kohen. Your sister is in charge of all the things they say in her schutz. We had the water in the midbar. She's a big shot too. And he uses these explicit words in source number 4. Line number 2, Vayakumu lifnei Moshe. He got up in front of Moshe. V'anashim b'nei Yisrael, and other men joined in with him. 50 u'masayim, 250 men. Nesi'ei Eda, heads, chiefs of their tribes. Kyrie moed anshe Hashem. And what do they say? Vayikol Moshe or Aaron. They come to Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer alehem. And what do they say to them? These 250 leaders of Bnei Yisrael. 2 words. Rav lochem. You took everything for yourself. You're the leader. Aaron's the chief priest. And Miriam is in charge of all these other things. You put yourself. And what do they say? Ki kol ha'eda kulam kadoshim. All of us are holy. We're all part of Hashem's nation. Why did you take everything for yourself? And look at the second to last line in source number 4. Imagine Moshe and Aaron standing there. They have basically put their entire lives on hold. They presided over the splitting of the sea. They brought the mun down from Shemayim through Hashem's blessing that they would have food to eat out of nothing. They had the cloud of glory that Hashem provided. They are escorting all these things as Hashem's messengers to protect and sustain Bnei Yisrael in a totally inhospitable environment. And here these people come to them less than a year or 2 into the Midbar. And they say, you guys, you're just taking it all for yourself. I can think of 100 responses that they could have had of how the sacrifices they personally have made, in disregard for their personal safety in taking them out of Mitzrayim. There's 100 things they could have said. And what did they say in response in source number 4? Second line from the bottom, Vayishma Moshe. Moshe listened to them. Vayipol upon him. And he fell on his face. He doesn't say a word. Passes over many easy responses that he could have had for them, and instead he falls on his face and he doesn't say a word. And in source number 5 and 6, it gets even crazier from there. This is a very, very difficult story to understand. In source number 5, Moshe says on the first line, Vayishlach Moshe l'kro l'dasav ha'aviram b'nei Aliyah, Dasan and Aviram, of doing nothing but making trouble since they entered Mitzrayim. They've been doing nothing but making trouble. They rebelled against Moshe Rabbeinu repeatedly prior to this. And Moshe says, for some reason, call to them, bring them here. Why on earth would he want them there? I have no idea. It seems like that's a counterintuitive thing to do. And what happens? Vayomnu lo na'aleh. Dasan and Aviram, staying true to their character, they say, no, we're not coming. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to see us. We're not interested. And then it gets really, really crazy. Perhaps, Bnei Yisrael had their ups and downs in the Midbar. We know about the Egel, the golden calf. We know about the Meraglim, the spies. There were ups and downs. This is perhaps the greatest verbal rebellion in the entire Torah. Listen to what Dasan and Aviram say. It's not enough that they say, we're not coming. Listen to what they say. Source number 5. Hama'at, line number 2. Ki he'elisanu me eretz zavas kol v'dvash. Remember, zavas, eretz zavas kol v'dvash are the terms used by Hashem to describe Eretz Yisrael, a land that flows with milk and honey. And what do Dasan and Aviram say? He'elisanu. They took us out of a land that flows with milk and honey. La'amisenu ba'midbar, so they could kill us in the desert. Can you imagine? Using the words that Hashem uses to describe Eretz Yisrael, to describe the joyous life they had in Mitzrayim, in Egypt. Things were so great when we were beaten as slaves. Things were so great when they were throwing our children into the river. That's the land of milk and honey that this guy took us out of. Or Ki Helisanu could be referring to Hashem. This is the land that they took us out of. Ki Helisanu me'eretz zavas chalav v'dvash. It's almost like they sat down and thought, Dustin and Aviram, how could we make this the most graphic insult to Moshe and Hashem possible? It's not enough to say, Moshe, you took everything for yourself. But Hashem, and through his Eved Moshe, they brought us out of a great place where we were slaves, and they took us out to die in the Midbar. Some crafting going on here about the language that they use. And then it gets even better on the last line of line 5. Look at this. It wasn't like they didn't know what they were saying. Af lo el eretz zavas chalav v'dvash hevisanu. And they haven't kept their word. They haven't brought us to this land that flows with milk and honey. They've got us in this decrepit wasteland called the Sinai Desert, where we can't even feed ourselves. We have no water to drink. We have to rely on miracles every day. They haven't kept their pledge. They took us out of this great land. Okay. So like I said, perhaps the greatest verbal rebellion in the entire time that they're in the desert. Well, we know Moshe's playbook already, right? Because Moshe's playbook at the beginning of this rebellion was, he didn't say anything. Vayipal upon him, he fell on his face. But not here. Look at source number 6. Second line. Vayichar leMoshe ma'od. Moshe was very angry. Vayomer el Hashem, al tefen al minchasam. Don't accept their carbon. We're going to have this little competition, a runoff that's in the Sukkah. Aaron's going to bring a carbon, and they're going to bring a carbon, and Hashem is going to show you which carbon he accepts and which one he doesn't. And Moshe turns to Hashem now. He says, "Don't take their mincha, their carbon." Why? Third line. Lo chamor echad mehem. I never took a single donkey from them. That's Moshe's complaint. That's Moshe's response, his retort to this complaint that they didn't take us to the land that flows with milk and honey. And Moshe responds, I didn't take a donkey from them. That doesn't go together. The response that I never even took a donkey from them would have been the appropriate response at the beginning when they said, you took everything from us. You're the head. Aaron's the second in command with being the Kohen Gadol. Your sister's in charge of everything else. You took everything. This would have been the perfect response. I haven't enriched myself at your cost. I haven't claimed any taxes. I've been leading you as God's messenger because God told me to. I didn't profit from this. I didn't want this. I didn't need this. That would have been the appropriate response to the accusation of Rav Lochem, you took too much. But remember, when Rav Lochem was the accusation, Moshe doesn't say anything. So we have two questions, really. Why, when they accused him of taking too much, didn't Moshe respond with this obvious response? I never took anything from you. Do you see me walking around with huge herds? Do you see me walking around with everything that you owned? I didn't take anything. So question number one, why didn't he say that when he was accused of taking too much? And question number two, here where they turn on Hashem and they say he broke his promise. He hasn't taken us to the promised land, and he took us out of this great land in Mitzrayim. All of a sudden, Moshe wakes up and he says, I never took anything from them. That has nothing to do with it. Why not put a response together? Hashem didn't take us out of the promised land. And Moshe says, wait a second. We were about to go into Eretz Yisrael just a few weeks ago, but you did the same thing. You rebelled with the Meraglim. And you called Eretz Yisrael a dangerous place that was too fortified, and our enemies wouldn't be able to consume us. There would have been obvious responses he could have said as to why they haven't reached the promised land yet. Or he could have said, things were so good in Mitzrayim, do you remember what it was like? Are you crazy? But no, he doesn't say any of that here when they complain about being taken out of a great land and Hashem not keeping their promise. Instead, he substitutes the answer that I never took anything from you, which would have been the appropriate response before. Is everyone processing this question? Any ideas? Because this is a head thumper. If 95% of the people didn't get the Benos Slachot and the Beni Shmitzri, 99% of the people do not notice this problem. It's a big problem. Any leader has to know how to address a challenge, has to know how to address a question that's being posed to him. And in this case, Moshe evades the first accusation, and then the second time he gives an answer, which is a non sequitur. He gives an answer to a different question. What is going on here? Any ideas? The real stumper, I guess. Yeah.
One difference is that in the first case, he's only saying something bad about Moshe, but in the second case, he's saying something bad about God.
So again, great point. Many of the Mefarshim talk about this. The idea that the first accusation was against Moshe alone, that Moshe took all the leadership positions for him and his family. And here, it's that they're saying Hashem didn't keep his promise to us. This is an attack against God. I think that's exactly why it says words here that it didn't say before. By Yichar Moshe Mod, Moshe got very angry. He was willing to be mochel on his personal covenant. Moshe didn't feel a need to defend himself. It is what it is. When people are attacking Hashem, who's providing sustenance and life for them on a daily basis, that was something he had no patience for. But I don't think that answers the question about why he gave the first answer in the second place. It's still very troublesome. So there's a tremendous message of psychology here. A tremendous message of psychology. Think for a second, what would have happened if Moshe used this answer of Acham Arachad Mehan, I never took anything from you, to the first question. You took everything for yourself, all the leadership positions, everything is you, your brother, your sister. We're all holy. And Moshe would have said, what are you talking about? Acham Arachad Mehem, I never took anything of yours. If Moshe would have responded in such a way, I think, perhaps, the next pasuk would have been very different. I think the next pasuk would have had the people yelling, you never took anything from us? You took all of our gold and silver to build the Mishkan, to put your brother in charge. You took Masus HaShekel from us to help pay for the Mishkan. What do you mean you never took anything from us? You bankrupted us. You took our money, you took our gold and silver. And Moshe understood that even though those weren't personal gains for him, that sometimes when people are angry, sometimes they're just angry. They're not angry at you. They're not even angry about the particular situation that they're complaining about. Sometimes they're just angry about their general condition. And when you argue against somebody who's just angry about their general condition, what happens often is you just up the ante, and people start yelling back at each other, accusations back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and things quickly get out of hand. I think that that's what could have happened if Moshe would have given that answer the first time around. You took everything from us? I didn't take anything. And they would have retorted and said, you took all the money, you took Masus HaShekel, you took all our gold and silver, all this to build your precious Mishkan and give your brother a job. Things could have gotten quickly, very ugly. And Moshe understood that sometimes the best way to respond to an angry person is not to say anything. Especially if they're in the frame of mind where you're not going to win the argument. Okay, so that gives us a partial answer to question number one. Why does Moshe then break out this answer when they rebelled against Hashem and said they took us out of a land that flows with milk and honey? And again, careful reading here. Careful reading. Look back at source number 6. Second line, Vayichar Moshe Mod. Moshe is very angry. And what does he do? Vayomer El Hashem. He says to Hashem, I never took anything from them. He doesn't respond to them with this answer. He's not yelling back at Bnei Yisrael and saying, I never took anything from you. It's not a non sequitur at all. Rather, what does Moshe Rabbeinu do almost every time Bnei Yisrael rebels in the desert? What does he do? What does Moshe typically do when Bnei Yisrael makes a mistake in the Midbar?
Talks to Hashem.
He talks to Hashem, and what does he do?
Pleads for them.
Yes! He davens for them. He says, forgive them. Understand they're not in the right. That's what Moshe does. He's our emissary. And he pleads with Hashem to forgive us. I think that's exactly what's happening here. But you don't read it in the words, because the words don't have tone. What happens? Moshe turns to Hashem, and he doesn't say, how could they accuse me of this? I never took anything from them. No. He's doing the same thing he always does. He turns to Hashem. He doesn't yell this to Bnei Israel. Al tefanam and chatzam. Show them the mistakes in their ways. Don't accept their carbon. Lo chamar echad mehem. Remember, I never took anything from them, and they're accusing me of taking everything for myself. They're not rebelling against you, God. It's not personal. They're not rebelling against you. They're just rebelling against me, against you. If there was Santa Claus here, they'd be rebelling against him. This is the frame of mind that they're in. They're in a frame of mind where they want to rebel. They want to strike out. And Moshe turns to Hashem and says, don't be angry with them. It's not personal. They don't really mean that they have tainas on you. They don't have complaints to God. Look at me. They're accusing me of taking everything from them. You know I never took anything from them. Tone matters. How you say something, the same lesson as Vados Lachman, except here it's doubled down on lessons of psychology. Understand the mindset of someone who's angry. Sometimes when someone's angry, the best response is nothing, and not to escalate things and let things get out of control. It's a nice talk right now. When you get married, this will be gold, okay? There's nothing more powerful than how to deal with a woman when she's angry. There's another thing about women being angry, and as long as you're here, you might as well know it. Thank God my wife doesn't get angry very often. But women, when they do get angry, there's something called the doctrine of transference. Any of you familiar with this? Probably not, because I made up the doctrine. The doctrine of transference is that when a woman is angry about anything, she can display this anger to any closest male figure. Brother, father, husband, son. When a woman's angry about something and she feels the need to express her anger, she will turn to her husband, her father, whoever it is, and start complaining about the situation bitterly. Like, hey, I didn't do anything. I'm just here. I tell this funny story once. It's now 34 years in the rearview mirror, so I think my wife will let me tell it publicly. My wife was upset about something. She was working as a school teacher at the time, the first year we were married, and something was going on at school that she was not happy about, and she's really, really upset. And I understood why she was upset, but by the same token, I thought there was a simple solution to the problem. So I told her, honey, why don't we just do X, Y, and Z and address the problem? And my wife, who's a very pleasant person, very mild-mannered, could never imagine this happening. She turns to me with smoke coming out of her eyes and fire coming out of her ears. And she says to me, sometimes when I'm upset, I don't want one of your brilliant solutions. I just want a little sympathy. And I thought, I've married the most irrational person on planet Earth. And I learned over the years that I did not marry an irrational person. I married a woman. They are all like this. Women, when they get angry, will take it out on the closest male figure. They don't understand that we take it personally, we get insulted. Again, lessons in psychology. You have to understand the mindset of the person you're talking to. It's just one funny example, but there are many of these differences. Men and women are fundamentally different. And I appreciate being able to share ideas of Chumash and Parsha with you and lessons from the Chumash, but I want to make sure you got the price of admission. So I'm going to share with you the greatest insight you will ever hear in your entire life on the topic of men and women and husbands and wives. Books have been written where they all steal my ideas. They've been doing this for years. But Men are from Mars, Women are from Venus, all these books that are written. I'm going to tell you something that is worth the price of admission. And when this happens in your life, because it will happen, you will understand that you're not married to a barbarian. But rather, there are simple differences in the genders and the way men and women react to different things. So, accept it from me, I'm going to tell you this story. A scientific study was done. This is now going back about 8 years. They took 500 men and 500 women. By the way, that's considered a large sample. When they test drugs that they're going to give you that can kill you, that often the sample size is 50 people. They're going to decide to give you life-threatening medication, which may save you, may kill you, based on a sample of 50 people. This was a sample of 500 men and 500 women. And they hooked the men and the women up to all types of machines which can measure physiological changes in the body. blood pressure, respiration rate, pulse, anything you could measure with a machine, they hooked them up to. And they put the 500 men over there, and they put the 500 women over there. And they asked them all the same question. First, the men. Name the 3 biggest stresses in your life. And the men are talking about their parnassa and all types of money issues and family and friends, all things that stress men. And guess what happened as the men talked about what stressed them? All the machines showed their blood pressures going up, their heart rates go, everything shows that the body's under stress. The more they talked about it, the more stressed they were. Then they asked the women the same question. What are the 3 biggest stresses in your life? And the women, much more uniformity. It's about my relationships and my children, all the things that women stress about all the time. And as the women talked about the great stressors in their life, the machines all showed that their respiration was going down and their blood pressure was going down. The more they talked about what was bothering them, the better they felt. Now, to the average man, this is a psychosis. I mean, whether you're a ball player, a video game player, a Talmid Chacham, every man has escapes. And we use these escapes so that we don't think about the things that stress us. Because we only have two ways of going about things when we have a problem. We fix it, or we ignore it and get away from it as far as we can. Because if we're focusing on a problem that we can't do anything about, it stresses us. And we feel it internally, that our bodies are under stress. Our heart rate's going up, our respiration's going up, everything's going up and showing that we're under stress. So we have man caves, we play video games, we play sports, we read a book, we learn Torah. Whatever your thing is, every man has something to escape stress that he can't solve. Women have no such thing. They want no such thing. It's the easiest solution in the world. If something is stressing me, let's talk about it. You've got to be out of your freaking mind. And this comes up in every marriage relationship. Because whenever there's a problem, a challenge, a strife, the man says, I'm going to go read a book. I'm going to go watch a baseball game. And the woman says, honey, we need to talk about this. And the man's like, no, we don't have to talk about it. Worse than that, not only is she suggesting a course, which is 180 degrees from the way his mind works, he then blames her. This unsensitive person is trying to kill me. She's trying to stress me out. This is not something we can do anything about. The best thing to do is to put it on the shelf and let time see what happens. But focusing on it is not going to help me. Why does she want to torture me like this? And the answer is she doesn't want to torture you. This is what makes her feel better. And the craziest thing of all is they don't understand us. They think we're being evasive, we're not dealing with the issue. No, they don't understand that the more we talk about an insolvable problem, the worse we feel. Both people are doing what is in their natural, instinctive best interest. And if you don't understand that the person you're married to is not crazy, they're just of a different gender, you think there's something wrong with your spouse. You're welcome. It'll be 4, 5, 8, 2 years. And you'll be having this go on in your own home. And you're going to think, that fake guy was onto something. You're welcome. But in any event, the craziest thing about all this, at our house on Friday night, we sometimes have very interesting discussions. We spend time debating such issues as, does God have a sense of humor? And we go around the table and different kids have different perspective on whether God has a sense of humor. And I think my daughter had one of the best responses to this. She said, of course God has a sense of humor because we have senses of humor. We can't have an ability that God doesn't have. Good answer. Sometimes we explore things less spiritual, like do you get wetter when you run in the rain or when you walk in the rain? Because obviously if you walk in the rain, you're out for a longer time, but maybe when you're running in the rain, you're hitting more drops as you run. And after much lively discussion, we came to the conclusion that 1,000 Frenchmen can't be wrong, and everybody tends to walk faster or run in the rain. There's probably a reason for it. So we said you probably stay drier if you run in the rain, unless if there's puddles. Because if there's puddles and you start running, you start kicking it all up on you, and that's a game loser. But in light of that, think about this. These fundamental differences in the way men and women deal with stress. And in these psukim, we see the differences between the way men deal with stress. But then Hashem says, let's make these people live together. This is a great idea. Can you imagine how much entertainment there'll be here? Make the man and woman live together in the same house, where their very biology and chemistry makes them respond to stressful situations in diametrically different ways. This is a page turner. They might make a feature film out of it. And yet, that's what all of us aspire to have a healthy relationship with a wonderful woman. And these things stand in their way simply because we don't understand these fundamental truths that are right here in the pages of the Chumash. First of all, people say things they don't mean when they're angry. It never does you any good to be angry. The one meter, the Rambam says never. Just put it in a box. I'm going to share with you a very personal story to drive this home. So it may be hard for you to believe, but when I was 17 years old, I was a bit of a hothead. And I would argue with teachers, I would argue with my parents, I would argue with friends, because there's a right and there's a wrong. And if somebody's wrong, it's necessary to point it out to them, simply because you're right. And I was learning this Rambam with one of my Rebbeim in Eretz Yisrael, Rav Asher Rubenstein, probably about a mile from here, in Montesdorf. And we're learning this Rambam, and the Rambam says, you should have every midah in between, like we talked about before. But anger, put it in a drawer. It never serves any purpose. And I saw myself in the pages of this Rambam. I remember saying things, doing things when I was angry that I regretted later. And I decided on that day that I was never going to get angry again. Now, there have probably been 2-3 times since then. One of them was just about a month ago. 2-3 times that I've really been angry. No, actually, I've been angry more than that, but I never displayed it. I'm not a magician. I can't change the fact that I feel angry sometimes about saying something. But I wouldn't yell, and I'd be very careful, like Moshe Rabbeinu, vayipal upon him, about saying things when I'm angry. So I blew it 2 or 3 times, but it's a pretty good track record. And it's a very fundamental lesson that we'll learn from another source that's not here. Every person sitting here has the ability to change themselves fundamentally on a personal midah, something intrinsic to who you are. You can say, I don't like that about myself, and starting today, I'm going to be different. I know it sounds hard. You can do it. You can. Whether your challenge is being angered, being cheap, whatever your challenge is, you can change it in a moment. So we learned that from a parsha we're going to learn in a couple weeks from now. This last week, we learned about Shimon and Levi, 2 of the brothers. And what do we know about Shimon and Levi? They massacred the entire nation of Shechem because they abused their sister. And at the end of Parshas Vayechi, which we're going to read in a couple weeks, they tell Yaakov gives them a bracha. They're the only brothers who don't give a bracha. Rather, they get criticism. You guys feed upon each other. You egg each other on. You're kanoim. You're extremists. And look at what happens after that. Shevet Levi spawns Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron, Miriam, these same people who are the leaders of Klal Yisrael. They become the standard bearers of the Kahuna and of Torah for Klal Yisrael. They're exempt from Shevet Mitzrayim. They don't work in Egypt. They learn Torah. What happens to Shevet Shimon? You don't hear about Shevet Shimon again until Sefer Bamidbar, when they are the ones who are consorting with the Midian women, and Cosby and Zimri have an affair immediately in front of everybody in public. That's the next time you hear from Shevet Shimon. And what happens? Pinchas comes along and stabs the 2 of them with a spear right through both of them at the same time. The Yalkut Shimoni says at the end of Sefer Devarim, that midah of Shevet Shimon is why they're the only Shevet that didn't get any bracha or any mention at the end of Zosa Bracha, at the end of Sefer Devarim. Because they had this midah that Shimon said, I am what I am. I can't change the fact God made me this way. And Levi said what we said a moment ago. I don't like that part of myself. And from today on, I'm going to be a different person. That doesn't mean there's never a place to get intense or passionate about something. In fact, who was it that killed Cosby and Zimri from Shevet Shimon? Who was it? It was Pinchas from Shevet Levi. He's the one who stood up and drove the spear between the 2 of them. Yes, there is a place still for my passion. there is a place for me to get upset, but in the appropriate time and the appropriate place. I'm not going to let it dictate who I am on a daily basis. Yeah, we're almost time to stop your question quickly.
Just like another add-on, like in the Hanukkah story as well, it was the Kohanim and the Levium that stood up to fight the Greeks.
Exactly right, 1000%. And you see it all through Jewish history, that same example of there's people that have this midah within them. We're not all the same. And there's a place to use the midah. Listen, the Rambam even says you can't be too generous either. If you give away all your money, you're not going to have food to eat. You have to have a balance. And there's always a time to break out our baser instincts. We can't let it run our lives. In any event, every time you learn Chumash, every time you learn a Parsha, understand there are gold mines here. There are golden nuggets to be milled. Just take the time to read, to translate, and understand perhaps the deeper meaning that you miss if you just read it quickly. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you. Hopefully we'll be together again soon. If anybody wants to be in touch with me, my email is davidefink@yahoo.com. I've had some lifelong relationships built with the people that I've met at this year, and I encourage you to contact me by email. And if you do, I'll be happy to give you my phone number as well. Thank you again to everybody. Thank you. Special thank you to Brother Bridles.